Out here in the perimeter, there are no stars. Out here, we is stoned, immaculate.
Hello and welcome. This is the C86 show. I'm David Eastaugh. As you know, we love a special guest. This week it's going to be the turn of Echobelly, who I spoke to very recently to find out more about life, love, poetry and all the other groovy stuff. And this was with Glenn Johansson and also Sonya Madan, who were, yes, on the end of a Zoom call, really. So just to give it some context, this is September 2021. They're about to go on tour throughout the UK over October, and they've got various dates, including next year at a festival, Creation Records, I do believe. So we talk about all that. But yes, this is a little bit about the tour that's going to come up. And then we get down to the usual exciting stuff that you know we love to talk about. Anyway, so yes, after talking about, getting to know you, as you do, it's showbiz, we got down to that nerve-wracking experience of going out on the road again and whether everything is going to still be okay or any members of the band could just get struck down with, whatever, COVID, I suppose. Anyway, this is Sonya's reply. Sonya, it's over to you.
Yeah,
it is scary. It's not just that. It's is there going to be another lockdown? Are people scared to go out and stand in crowds together at the moment? There's all sorts of issues. I think you've got to be a complete nutter or very brave to be an artist.
Yes,
exactly. It's not that I was kind of scared of getting ill or anything like that. It just, as Sonya said, if that's like a fire, what do you call it? Those fire lockdowns, whatever it's called.
Yes.
Short one or something. Fire break. That's more nerve-wracking for me than anything else. I'm not bothered about anything else, really.
No, well, absolutely. And just kind of briefly, because I always find this kind of interesting, so stick with it. But, I was born in the sort of like the mid-'60s, so my early formative musical moments in life were the early 70s with glam, with, Sweet, Slade, T-Rex, Gary Glitter. Luckily, David Bowie was my first single and my first love. Thank God for that. What was your kind of, both of you, not together, but individually, what was your kind of musical moment that happened that changed your life, so to speak?
Well, it's not that dissimilar from yours, really. I think Bowie was always a big kind of influence when I grew up. But I also was really into kind of heavier rocks, Led Zeppelin, Black Sabbath, things like that. I kind of grew up on that as well. And later on, I kind of got into bands like the Smiths, for instance, and that kind of changed my direction a little bit, I think. Yes. And now I'm kind of gone back to my original thing again, I think, a little bit more. So it all comes around.
Yes, it all comes in. Sonya?
I find it quite difficult to answer because I didn't have what most musicians seem to have a real love of, music, and they grow up and want to follow in that category. I honestly say I fell into this by accident. And yes, I listened to chart music, and I was a devotee of John Peel when I was a teenager. But really, I wasn't. I mean, there was a period in my life I wasn't allowed out of the house until God knows when. I only allowed to go to the library to study. So I didn't have access to a lot of things. I did sneak off once and, go out with my girlfriends, and we went to see some band or something. But generally speaking, I'm a bit of an oddity.
Yes. Well, it was interesting because I remember sort of doing a interview with a woman, Rachel, I can't remember her surname, she was an American, and I think the band was called Kicking Giants, and she came from a very sort of Christian household, and they had to have prayer meetings, and sort of decide whether she could sort of, I don't know, sing a song or something like that. It was like she started at a very, it was one of those kind of American fundamental Christian households that was very strict on everything, and obviously she became a sort of a wild, punk.
What do you expect? Really?
How to rebel.
But there was a lot to, because actually my parents, I mean, they were nice, but they were very conventional, so it was quite easy. But I can't imagine what it'd be like to have parents who might have gone to Glastonbury and seen Jimi Hendrix or gone to see these wild bands and taken lots of drugs.
I imagine it's a bit like Ab Fab, in Absolutely Fabulous, in the sense that you are rebelling against your parents. If they're pretty wild, you're like, oh, for God's sake, no, just grow up. So I've seen that. I've got friends who come from very bohemian backgrounds. They're one in particular, her mother is an actress, and her godmother's a very famous actress, and her godfather's a very famous rock star. And she did the opposite. She became a lawyer, and she, it was just like watching her mum get drunk and take drugs in the 70s. It turned her the other way. So in her own way, she's rebelling as well, I suppose.
Yes. So was the 80s the kind of the formative years then for both of you, sort of, with your musical direction of what happens next in the 90s?
For me, growing up, I think the first thing I fell in love with was Madness. I just loved, because they were like the boys at school for me, exactly the same look and character and cheekiness and immense talent, but it was never suck your cheekbones in and be cool. It was just a joyous celebration of what they were, which was pretty damn unique for the times.
Yes.
And also the Specials and bands like that, they're the ones that I really remember kind of really enjoying, really getting into.
Yes. And Glenn, what was your moment like in the 80s?
I don't know. I think, again, as I said before, I think the Smiths were quite pivotal for me. And I was really into a lot of kind of those late 80s guitar bands. What are they called? Smiths, As the Camera, Echo and the Bannerman, kind of all that kind of thing, that kind of jangly guitar, British.
Yeah, because it's kind of it kind of, having done this show and being obsessed with that period, and especially the next period as well, it's kind of interesting because you had the punk world, and then you had post-punk, and then you had this like the Specials, and then you had sort of the Paisley movement and the goth movement. But indie pop came along I've got indie pop between the years of 83 to 87, which was the years of the Smiths. It's not a full sort of watertight theory, but it's kind of the best I can do. And then when they broke up, Ecstasy came along, and there was this kind of whole change, and the next wave of 16 to 18-year-olds wanted their soundtracks. So it was like Primal Scream, the Happy Mondays, and suddenly rave became a thing. And then slowly you had the Pixies and Throw Muses, and then obviously the grunge scene from Seattle. So there were bands who came along a little bit after that, like the Sundays. So I remember thinking at the time, God, the party feels like it's almost moved on a bit, and they've just appeared. Even though their first album was still brilliant, it did feel like there had been this kind of quite a big shift in sort of musical styles and trends. And I wondered if you'd picked up on
that.
We're perhaps not such musos as you are.
No, but you're spot on, though, I think.
Yeah.
I think you're spot on.
I mean, we wouldn't think about it perhaps as in such depth.
Yes, but then, so as the decade changed and suddenly we had the John Major years, we loved the John Major year, especially now. It seems so much better. When did the band sort of begin to sort of form and sort of start to, hatch?
It was 92 or 93.
Late 93, I think it was. Or 93, yeah, 93.
Yeah,
93.
Yeah, 93.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm a London girl. Glenn came over with a bunch of Swedish guys, and they were playing in a band in a bar in central London, and we just clicked. I was watching all these blonde guys playing guitar, and Glenn and I we got on. And 3 weeks later, he moved into my flat in Soho, and I kind of fell into writing with him. Just to see what it was like, because I've always had a love of words, and I consider myself a lyricist more than a singer.
Yeah.
And so I think that it was just this wonderful way of expressing myself, to have someone to be able to write such, in my view, beautiful music, and for me to have the chance to put words to it. So it was just because we were young, and time is. It's just priorities are different then. You don't have any issues as to, mortgages, children, all that stuff that most people get into later on in life. We just loved what we were doing, and very quickly put a band together, because London was very vibey then. Literally, bands were cropping up everywhere. You could go anywhere. There were always gigs going on, lots of venues, lots of pubs, places to
Yes.
meet, art, creativity, in fashion. Everything was there. It was just a very buzzing time, I think. We're very lucky.
There was quite a lot of bands that came up, because the other thing that us, found out from doing these interviews is timing is everything. Some people went, God, we were just 2 years too early for that scene, and we just kind of missed it. And our life, but your timing couldn't have been more perfect, really, because there was this kind of new wave of, I suppose, optimism, even though we're, I say we, this is me really here, isn't it? Feeling we moan a lot, don't we? Let's face it. So we're never happy until we look back, and then we get very nostalgic about a period. So there was this kind of strange optimism leading up to the new Labour period, and you sort of slotted in just perfectly with this kind of sense of optimism, even though with your lyrics there were sort of kind of dark undercurrents as well, wasn't there?
Yeah, I suppose I always explored unexplored territory. If you actually bother to, or if you're an Echobelly fan and you understand some of the subject matters are quite obtuse and esoteric at times. So I think that you could take it as a like a typical Britpop band and just celebratory, but there was always an undercurrent of something else, something darker going on with us.
Yes, well, absolutely. And did you sort of find you quickly got an audience? Because that's the other thing that sort of people often sometimes struggle with, and other times people just kind of quickly go, my God, there's so much attention. We can't this is all going terribly easily.
It happened very quickly for us, very quick. I mean, I'd never really done anything before. And we literally, you could count the number of gigs we did on your hand. And that was it. We did one gig in Essex. Nobody turned up, not one person. And then literally a few gigs later, there was such a buzz, and we couldn't get in. I remember going out to get some food and then coming back to the venue and just pushing past people. You couldn't get into the bloody show because it was just full of music industry and people trying to sign you. So it was all, very black and white, really. It was very strange experience.
And you went with Rhythm King Records at that time. What was the sort of reason for that?
Because they were so keen. I think artists, it's something people don't talk about enough. We're a very insecure bunch. And when someone tells you that they love you or they admire you or that they really get you, it presses buttons on deep levels of insecurity and self-doubt, that you feel that that person is going to protect you. Ironically, they're the ones that usually rip you off. But in your naivety, you feel understood.
Yes.
Because if someone says all the right things, as in, I love your music, I really want to work with you, I want to take you further, let's make rock and roll together. And you just think, yes, especially when you're young and naive and you have no guidance in this business.
Yeah, did you have a manager at this stage who sort of found themselves part of the team?
Again, in the broadest sense of the word.
We had a manager who was a manic depressive and turned out to be how do I put it diplomatically?
Useless.
Okay, there you go. Not very good.
Well, they
he did seem well, but he was useless. We had a lot of attention in America. We had a big management teams out there trying to take us on. And even though the deal was for him to let somebody else manage us in America, he just didn't let it happen. So we missed the boat. There's all sorts of things that you just think, oh God, if someone had just helped us along the way, it would have been a lot better.
Yes, absolutely.
That's rock and roll.
It is rock and roll. Because I know when I remember Robert Plant doing an interview once, and he was saying that when John Bonham had died and Led Zeppelin had finished, he said that was the end of innocence. Did you have a moment like that yourself with the band, where it felt suddenly like everything was kind of going so well, and then something happened that you thought, God, I can't be that.
Well, we had a number of things go wrong at the same time. It was the stars misaligned, shall we say. And we had our best friend who actually came up with the name Echobelly hanged himself, rather. And we had all our money stolen by our accountant, and we had sacked our manager at this time, so he was now suing us. So we were in this horrible position of, also the record company Sony wanted to take us on, and Rhythm King didn't want to let us go. They wanted to take us to another label. So they were fighting. So for a whole year we were stuck. We couldn't make a record, and then everything imploded. The money that was stolen literally left us with £200. It wasn't just us, it was Primal Scream and Suede and a number of other bands, but it was an awful time. And it was the culmination of death, suicide, rock and roll, just disaster, theft. And in the end, the drummer, Glenn, and myself, we sat there getting very drunk, and we decided we're just going to go on a trek, and we're going to go to Nepal for Millennium, because, you know, life is just hell here, and we're going to sit and look at Mount Everest and listen to Jimi Hendrix. That was the drunken conversation. And we did one practice walk in Richmond Park, which ended up in the pub, and off we went to Nepal on this trek, totally not prepared at all for what was to come. And it was just, that was our moment of almost desperately trying to take control of our sanity.
Yes. That was quite something. Your 90s was quite full, wasn't it, really? Let's face it. You managed to get, was it 3 albums, various kind of massive tours, a huge amount of publicity, but you must have felt kind of, did you feel emotionally chewed up by then?
Yes, very much so.
You know, because that's always the crazy. Because I did an interview with the guy from the Bay City Rollers. God, I can't remember his Christian name now. God, that's terrible. But he was one of these. You know, they were huge. They were huge all over the world. And then one day he just walked off and went, "Where's my money?" It's like, you haven't got any. It's like, you know, his life just went through horrendous experiences ever since. You know, and then he unfortunately died this year, I think. So. Yes, it's not an easy trip, actually. So when you were sort of making, obviously, the big album that really sort of shot you into this kind of massive fame was On. Can you remember the process of putting that together? Did that sort of happen relatively smoothly?
Well, the album was kind of written on tour, because we released the first, after we released the first album, we were touring there quite heavily. So I remember writing a lot whilst touring. And we wanted to work with 2 producers that did Radiohead's The Bends, Paul Coldery and Sean Slade. They were based in America, in Boston area. And they came over here to record the album, did some pre-production, some rehearsals with them. Then we went into Conk Studios in North London. It was quite an easy recording, I think. A couple of weeks tops, and then went over to America to mix it in Boston. So that was an enjoyable process, I think. The second album, it really was. It's very creative. We got on really well. It's no problem at all. We had a great time doing it. So yeah.
Yes, and with the song called Dark Therapy, how did that sort of come about, and can you remember the process of that being written and recorded?
Just trying to rewrite what's his name?
Lyrically, I had a flatmate who was a heroin addict, and well, he wasn't a heroin addict, he took heroin, let's put it that way. And I remember watching him inject himself. And he was talking about, if you get a tiny bit of the cotton wool in your bloodstream, you get a fever. And this is dark therapy. And I, forever the lyricist and forever looking for titles, the whole song is about, you know, how we reach for these highs through very dark means. And the sort of the darkness in everyday life, because you've got the
sorry, the doorbell.
Probably Amazon.
You've got these, like the third verse is very much, you know, 2 sides of the coin. If you listen to the words, it's lyrically talking about, you know, the positive and the negative, and the whole song is about the juxtaposition between the two.
Yes. So how does that, because the sort of the other single from that album, which kind of just hit everybody, didn't it? Was Great Things. Is that sort of a bit of a sarcastic take on life, or were you?
Which one? Sorry.
Great Things.
Great Things. Never heard of it. Oh, Great Things is, again, it's just about when you're at a certain point in life and you're full of altruistic possibilities. You really, when you're a child, you say, yeah, I want to be an astronaut. You don't say, I want to work in a job that I hate. It's all about that point in life where you're still full of positivity, hope, and possibility, which kind of captured a certain era in Britpop as well. So I think that's why it became an anthem.
Yes, well, absolutely. And I know that actually, as with this famous cassette, everybody who was on it at the time sort of didn't want to be on it. And there were various bands who said, no, I definitely want to be on it. But then decades later go, God, I wish I was on that album. And Cherry Red Records has put out a triple CD of 66 tracks, and everyone wants to be part of it. Did you have the same feeling with Britpop of like a love-hate relationship with that whole, oh God, we're part of this scene?
It was love-hate. I think it was love-hate for everybody. But also, if you weren't part of that scene, you were very much ignored. So it was dreadful for any band that... I mean, I remember reading an interview with Massive Attack, wonderful band, said that they couldn't get any press attention at the time because they weren't bloody Britpop. So it was just really inclusive and exclusive, if you know what I mean. That's all anybody seemed to want to talk about.
Yes.
So it was, thank God, yeah, we're part of it. But at the same time, whatever you rise with, you die with as well. And that's what happened with...
Yes. So when you came back into like 2001 with the fourth album, People Are Expensive, you'd sort of had quite a few years apart. How did that process sort of re-emerge? And did you make the phone call, or was it always sort of a plan that you were going to do that album?
It wasn't the same lineup. We kind of lost people along the way. So it was really, by then it was Glenn, myself, and our drummer Andy. So yeah, it was a departure from everything, and it was almost like when you feel that you still need to make music, and I say need to make music because it is a difficult path for most people. But you're free from A&R, you're free from the restrictions of expectation. It's very interesting to see what artists can come up with in that sort of place.
Yes.
And the title itself, it was garnered from this radio interview with this bizarre American woman who used to she had an agency for artists or lookalikes. She had a lookalike agency where, if you couldn't get the real Elton John, you'd get a lookalike Elton John. And she was quite crass in her interview. She said, oh, people are so expensive, you can't possibly get them. It was like something from, Spitting Image. It was just hilarious. And we managed to record it and sample it. So it's actually in one of the tracks. But I just thought that actually that title or those words, People Are Expensive, is so full of meaning. You can take it into any trajectory of thought, as in, we are dear, we are important, or we cost so much and we ruin the planet. You can go anywhere with it. And I love open-ended.
Yes. I hadn't thought of it like that. Yeah, that was good. And did it, at that stage of going in and recording the album, what was the atmosphere like? I mean, I know you've sort of had a slightly different, less band. I mean, was it a sense of kind of enjoyment still doing it, or was there a sense of just feeling like, oh God?
No, absolute excitement.
No, it's the opposite there, say.
Absolute excitement.
We had me and Andy, the drummer, we had just beginning to learn to start record with computers. Software called Logic, very early stages of that. So we had the facilities to do a lot of kind of demoing at home. So we spent a lot of time working on the songs, and it gave us that freedom to really do that. And we had worked with a guy called Ben Hillier. He worked on Lustra, the last album we did for Sony. He did some programming on the album, and we really liked what he did. So we approached him to produce the album. And we had to get a bass player, so we go, can't you remember his name now? His name was, I just played on one record.
People are expendable as well as expendable.
Yeah, exactly. And we recorded it in Brixton. It was really enjoyable, really creative process. We also had a keyboard player that was a real genius with kind of, screwing around with sounds and make anything sound wonderful. So it was a great time.
Yes.
I've got to say, the song on that album called Point Doom, we would never have been able to release something like that before. It would have,
Well, I always find it kind of interesting, going back to my David Bowie thing, was that I know his 60s work was pretty hit and miss, mostly quite miss. And then he did his kind of, early 70s, which was kind of all over the place. But the Low album was like so experimental. And I suppose I often think bands and artists need to have those kind of moments of experimentation where you just think, we're just going to do it for ourselves. And I always remember Brian Eno saying, when, talking about the process, and him telling David Bowie, he's like, no one's going to die from what we do on this album, by the way. Let's just go with the ideas. And when you listen to it now, it is kind of like, that must have just blown the record company's mind. So it must have felt very nice to have that experience yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we started experimenting a little bit more with that album for the first time. Used to gather instruments and things, so it felt like a real departure.
Yes. And how were you? And how were you coping from that sort of post 90s period of all the attention and the sort of the front covers and the sort of like television and stuff like that, dealing with the next decade and another scene?
It was very weird because there wasn't really a scene. I think it was a very dead period musically, the kind of millennium.
Yes, I get a bit lost with that area because I know there's people like Jimmy Iovine, and they would started doing all the, I know he's a record kind of producer and label sort of person, but I know they were starting to bring in people like Marilyn Manson and all this kind of quite heavy rap stuff, and NWA was sort of doing stuff. I might be getting completely confused with my years at the moment, but there was sort of a scene, there was a time when the production value of records was getting quite heavy, and sort of everything was getting a bit comic. It had that comic effect of people like Marilyn Manson, I suppose. So I wouldn't say that to his face, he'd kill me. But yes. But yes, no, I was just kind of curious how that happened, because when I spoke to you, I think it was a few years ago, Glenn, you'd been sort of looking at was it tapes or recordings you were sort of remastering for another project from Abbey Road?
Yeah, it was probably, we did an album quite recently called Blackout Lullabies.
Right.
This is a collection, because we wanted to create an album with a certain mood to show people another side of Echobelly, because most people, if they don't really know the band, they hear Echobelly, they know great things. That's King of the Curve, perhaps, that's it. But we wanted to make an album to show the darker side of the band and to create a certain atmosphere. And Sonya came up with the title Blackout Lullabies, so it was a double vinyl album. And yes, I had to find all these tapes that I had stored away for years and years and years, and all DAT tapes. I don't know if you remember DAT tapes.
Yes.
So it was kind of nerve-wracking going through all those tapes because I was a bit worried about them, being faulty or something. One song got screwed up completely. The tape just went nuts. So, but fortunately, the producer had an old copy in his archive somewhere. So we managed to get it all done.
Yes, and that's, I mean, I was listening to that today.
The record company holds of the masters as well, so we had to deal with Sony again, but it was all good. All good.
So how have you coped? How have you navigated with that world of publishing and ownership of your work and sort of making a life or living from music?
We get by. It goes up and down, to be honest, but I think it's really important, if you can, to try to own as much of your own catalogue as you can. And we're lucky we own our publishing. All of it has come back to us now because we were recouped a long time ago. And
Right. So that's probably been your best thing ever, really, isn't it?
Yeah.
So so do you feel that after this kind of lockdown and the tour, is there kind of going to be another chapter with the band and the sort of core of the band, which is probably you two?
Well, we don't actually know how to do anything else, so I'm afraid you're stuck with us for a while. I think.
We have a few ideas. We start thinking about another album, but we just got to do this tour first, and then we're going to get cracking.
Yes. And are you looking forward to sort of going out and touring again? Because I know that some bands, I mean, it seems a little bit different with you, but I did a kind of interview with two members of Lush when they sort of done their thing. Then they had a reunion and it didn't go terribly well. And, they'll never, ever play again. I mean, do you ever sort of find that there's a sort of keeping Echobelly, the name, as some sort of like with sort of artistic integrity important to you?
It's fundamentally important. Without that, what's unless you go and start a new project, then you can forget it. But I think it's really important to set out to follow your own path, no matter what, because at the end of the day, it is pop music or popular music, but it's still creative in your own mind, and you wouldn't be doing it otherwise. So it's really important.
Yes, well, I think everybody I ever interviewed, it's kind of interesting because a lot of those 80s bands have a 5-year narrative. They get together, they have that 12 months, the honeymoon period, they get a John Peel session, that's good. The first album, that's even better. And then there's the sort of touring, and then the second album, and then possibly the third, and then it's kind of over. Mostly, quite a lot seem to have had a massive kind of break for music, and then they sort of slowly come back to it, but they kind of juggle a job career with playing music, whereas it seems like you've really just stuck with much more of a focused mind on playing music in the band.
Yeah.
And does that mean you're still feeling kind of inspiration and sort of ideas coming, all the time?
God, I don't want to say too much because
joking.
Well, yeah, I do. I feel excited when I think about the possibility of writing another album.
Yes, which is good. And are you finding, because I suppose the world of Spotify is a bit tricky, isn't it? It's like it's not great for money, but it's kind of good to get your work out there. Are you finding new fans, people who are discovering you for the first time and to sort of come in? Well, you haven't played too many shows yet, have you? But are you starting to sense that there's going to be a bit of a different audience than the last time you played live?
You just never know. I think what's interesting is I did an interview for a radio show recently, and they said that some of the readers had said that they were playing Great Things to their daughters as a song for female emancipation, and the fact you can do anything if you want to.
Yes.
Being a woman shouldn't restrict you. So I never wrote it for that, but it was very interesting to think that young girls were, whatever level, were using it as some sort of a positive
anthem. It's a positive anthem, isn't it, really? Yes, I would imagine that has sort of gone down well. And I noticed that next year you'll be playing at the Creation kind of festival, which is next May, which do you enjoy those kind of get-togethers? I just wondered if it's the case that now that you meet each other, from some of those bands, there's a little bit more of a kinship of sort of, not a support network, but because I suppose a lot of people have often said, at the time everyone was very guarded and they had their little kind of bubble and little world and didn't speak to anybody else, and they really wish they'd just been a bit friendlier to other bands. But now they're kind of a bit older and wiser and they've had experience and they realise, well, let's just be friendly to each other. I just wondered if you've also found yourself being able to be a little bit more like, oh, hi, rather than, oh my God, I'm.
Well, I think you spot on there. I think as people go older, they kind of realise, it's unnecessary, and I find that people are a lot more friendly now than they used to be. It was great rivalry between bands in the 90s. It wasn't that friendly, I thought. Anyway, we weren't really that friendly with a lot of bands, right?
Well,
The odd one, but
we're friendly with Oasis and Blur. I suppose.
yeah.
Yes. Well, I think sometimes also, and I suppose I'm a bit like this, shyness can come over sometimes as being a bit offish, but you think, I'm just shy and insecure. Just give me a break. So there you go. And what, I mean, if you could have said something to your 16, 18-year-old self starting out, is there any kind of advice that you would say, God, I really would just whisper this in their ear, even if they would just ignore it?
Ooh. I'm sure there is. I think because it's a profession that you don't get any training for, I think would have helped if someone had said to us or had said to myself to kind of believe in yourself, stand by yourself almost. You know, don't prevaricate, don't worry, don't. It's very difficult because, you know, when you create something, you put your heart and soul into something, you create it, and then some dodgy little journalist says something nasty about it, you can be so traumatized. I'm not saying me, I'm quite a tough cookie, but I know other people have been deeply wounded by comments, to the point that, you know, you can make yourself ill from it, or people kill themselves.
Yes, well, actually, that's quite interesting because I did an interview with a New York artist. I think his name's Oxbow, kind of quite an extreme character. And he said that after a bad review, he sort of put a gun in his mouth. He was about to blow it, and his friend said, "Don't do that. It's not worth it." It's like, my God, that is kind of true. That kind of sensitivity to criticism.
Oh, it's just music, but it's not just fucking music. It's so important to certain people. Not just music, but any form of creativity. You are basically laying your heart and soul there, and criticism is going to hurt, but you're not prepared for it. I mean, I had a chat with maybe I shouldn't talk about this too much. I had a chat with someone who then went and killed themselves the day after, and he was trying to reach out to me, and he needed help. He needed a friend, and I'd never met him before. And he disappeared the day after, and I wish I'd sat and talked to him longer, but I remember just thinking, wow, you know, he's in pain, and all of a sudden the rest of the band come in all drunk and pissed, and he buggered off, and I didn't see him again. It was Richie from Manic Street Preachers.
Right.
It was the day before he disappeared. The night before he disappeared, or rather, we played a gig, and he turned up, and he was trying to speak to me. He wanted. I mean, I haven't told the Manics because I've never met them, so I kind of quiet because, you know. But yeah, he was deeply upset.
Yes, God, that is quite traumatizing, actually, isn't it? Really, just to have that kind of memory. I think, yeah, you can't. Yes, no one knows what's going to happen the next day, but you just don't expect that really to happen the next day, do you, at all?
Well, I think you know, someone mentioned that he just read something really nasty in the Enemy, or something that took him over the edge of an already troubled mind. You know, so it happens.
Yeah.
Named the gun after the journalist.
Yeah, I mean, seriously? Yeah. He named the gun after the journalist who'd written the bad review.
Cheesy, crazy. Yes, that is.
So if I did go back, I would just basically give myself a little bit more, like a blanket, a psychological blanket around myself.
Yes, well, I think that's true. Well, it's kind of interesting because I know from that period, there's been quite a few singers who you just think, oh, I mean, it's a bit difficult because, to be honest, I was a huge Smiths fan, so it's been a really difficult ride with my favourite, you know, singer from that period. And you know, again, you know, I just have to think, oh well, I have no idea, but it does kind of make people a bit strange, and then there's other people from that period who, like Sinead O'Connor, who also struggled, and Michelle Schocht, who seemed to struggle. And I suppose I was never a musician myself, but realizing that, like you said, you put yourself out there, you're on stage, you're singing these lyrics, you're creating so much. It's not like you're giving yourself, like putting out 50%, you're putting out 100%. And at the same time, you're still relatively young. So it's very tricky when people make slightly, callous or crass remarks, because obviously it's like, it's better. I suppose I've learned it's better not to say anything if you've got nothing really positive to say about a situation, really.
Yeah, up to a point, but I also think it's really important to express yourself. If you feel strongly about something, even though it goes against the grain of thinking, I think if you don't speak out, you end up suppressing it, and that doesn't do you any good, physically or mentally. It's important to let people have free speech and be strong enough in yourself to say, okay, that's a point of view, I disagree with it, but respectfully let people speak, because if you suppress, it's been proven time and time again, you create extremism.
Yes, well, yes, absolutely. But I suppose it's kind of interesting coming back to that NME experience or that writing, because I think I've often put that, the way that Morrissey got sort of hassled. I'm not defending Morrissey completely here, but I do kind of think that things kind of can build up in people, which probably might not have been there, but can just stir people up and make them even more angry. And I think that can have an effect on an individual as well, who's probably a bit sensitive at the best of times.
But well, I always think of Morrissey as a culturalist. I mean, he's been accused of being a racist. He's not a bloody racist, for God's sake. He's just done. Seriously, he's a culturalist. He's an oddity. He's unique, and he has certain opinions that can be misinterpreted very easily. There's also a tongue-in-cheek element, there's a questioning, there's an exploration of culture and what it means to be British, or what it might have meant for him to feel safe, what he might have loved when he was growing up. But I do not accept the guy as a racist. I have to stand my ground there, as an Indian lady.
Yes, well, I suppose I spoke to a lot of people from Manchester who knew him when he was very young, and from what they say, they wouldn't think he was a racist, but they just think, who knows? I haven't seen him for decades.
Well, I'll tell you one thing which is never talked about with white people, is that coloured people are racist too. It seems always to be like, oh, only white people have to be educated, but you go into any society and you will see racism. It's human nature to compare and disapprove and try to make yourself feel better by putting somebody else down. And I'm not saying it's a good thing, but it is human nature. And within Indian culture, within African culture, within Chinese culture, I have seen racism all the time, but it's never talked about. We are all racist in our own way. And I think we just need to just calm down and have a bit more of a sense of humour and a positive approach to life. We're all trying our best.
Well, yes, I think that's very true, and that's very. I think there's not much more. But look, thank you ever so much for giving me the time for this, and yes, and best of luck for the tour, and hopefully it all goes really well, and coming to Norwich in October, which is. After this heat wave, October seems a bit strange, really. Now it just feels like we're in the middle of summer here. But anyway, pardon? Oh yeah, I'm in Norwich. Yeah, we're in Norwich. So there you go. But look, thank you ever so much again, and yes, all the best. And
thanks, David.
Oh, I'm trying to hit the button. Right, take care. Bye bye.
Thank you, David. Bye. All the best. Bye bye.
And there you go, dear listener. That's showbiz. That's how to end a phone call message anyway. It's all a bit fumbly, but I like to leave it in just for that very exciting, memory. A massive thank you to Echobelly, that's Sonya and Glenn, for giving me the time for that. This has been David Eastaugh, the C86 Show. If you want to contact me, you can on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, just do C86 Show. And also, all these have been archived, aren't you lucky? And you can find those on Spotify, iTunes, Podbean. Do check them out. Anyway, have a great week and stay safe.